Well, that space game there looks like a thrill a minute. Why not try a real blast?
In less than a year, it went from a golden age.
It's part of the American culture. I mean, video games are just part of the culture as apple pie and motherhood.
Now you're talking.
To its darkest hour.
Let's put it this way. A lot of people didn't like E.T. E.T. became the icon of the crash.
It was really the demise of the business, and we unfortunately didn't see it coming.
This game is awful and otherwise lacking any redeeming values.
So a lot of really bad games got out there. Not to say the bad games don't get out there still, but some really bad games got out there in the early 80s.
This is the story of the birth and near death of the home video game market. The story begins just as the decade does, with big hair.
I want to be different, and I think I was good the way I dressed.
And big dreams. The video game industry begins with a boom, having gone from a non-existent medium to annual sales of nearly $2 billion. And more arcade games move into homes.
We used to joke at Activision that we'd write a cartridge and throw it up in the air and money would fall out of the sky. I mean, every game we did was selling 500,000 to 1 million units. The profit margins were extraordinary. So the company was just making money faster than they could put it in the bank.
And a generation of kids are hooked on games.
I mean, it's part of the American culture. I mean, video games are just part of the culture as apple pie and motherhood.
Arcades are everywhere, and both kids and adults are drawn into the dark rooms, dropping endless quarters into the latest digital fad.
The arcade crowd back in the old days was really weird because you definitely had all the little scrubs like me, you know, like little kids who were riding their bikes there, and then you had like high school students and you had college students. But then it was also really weird because you had like businessmen. It was really weird because it wasn't like a kid phenomenon. It was like really across the board phenomenon.
Experts predict that by the mid-'80s, combined arcade and home video game sales will soon be higher than movie box office revenue. As the summer of 1980 rolls around, Atari sues Activision, a software company made up of former Atari employees, over whether Activision has the right to produce games for Atari's popular 2600 video computer system. By December, the verdict is in, and the courts allow Activision to make the games. 4 months later, sales for Activision titles reached $6 million.
There was this perception that Atari was a fad. You know, people were comparing the 2600 to the Pet Rock and that it couldn't be duplicated. And probably a lot of your viewers wouldn't even know what a Pet Rock is. But you had a lot of companies that had emerged overnight after Activision's success.
And of course, once Activision became successful, then came Imagic.
Imagic Demon Attack.
And Apollo, 20th Century Fox. Everyone had to jump into it.
And network games are waiting for you.
And that opened up the industry. Before then, no one had a clue. And I think that single seminal event was the thing that really led to the overcrowding of the market.
The home and arcade video game market is filling up with brand new companies.
And of course, as more and more companies got in, there's more and more game supply and just not enough demand to support that much. And plus, you have the games back then, because of people rushing into the market. What happened was people wanted games that they recognized the titles. So if a new company got into the business, like Parker Brothers, for example, they would go out and spend a whole lot of money and get like the rights to Empire Strikes Back, James Bond, but they weren't experienced in video games, so they would get the best titles, but then they would produce the worst games.
Toy companies like Parker Brothers and Hasbro form video game divisions. But when unrelated companies like Chuckwagon Dog Food and Quaker Oats jump on board, the market begins to turn.
Yeah, that was a problem. I mean, it was funny. I was talking to Steve Cartwright yesterday, and we remember how we went to CES and look at all these other companies and laugh and just say, this is a big joke. I mean, all the games were horrible. One year there were 10 extra companies, the next year there were 30 extra companies.
A lot of people just got burned. They just got tired of getting all these bad games. So that drove people away from video games. There were no checks and balances for quality in those days. So a lot of really bad games got out there. Not to say the bad games don't get out there still, but some really bad games got out there in the early 80s.
The world's greatest arcade video games are now the world's greatest home video games. They're only from Atari.
Atari, with about 12 million consoles in homes, is still dominating the game industry until they release an old arcade favorite.
That game?
With disappointing results.
Here comes Pac-Man, biggest game in the history of arcades. People are really excited. The pre-orders are huge. Atari is so sure that this is going to be a hit that they made more copies of Pac-Man than there were active VCSs in people's homes, and this would be a huge hit. Game stunk. Really, really stunk.
It's pathetic.
The ghosts keep on appearing and disappearing. They didn't move smoothly. Pac-Man didn't move smoothly. The mazes were not the same mazes that you saw in the arcade game. The dots were replaced with dashes. There was just nothing right in it.
Yeah. One of the employees at Atari, they were sorry about Pac-Man. They didn't like it. And he was at a video game store when it came out. And the father walked into the store because his son wanted Pac-Man. And the storekeeper gives him the cartridge, shows it to him, and he goes, "That's Pac-Man?" And he didn't want to buy it, but his son wanted it. And the Atari employee just felt so bad that this was what they were marketing with the Pac-Man name, and it didn't resemble the game at all.
In spite of the quality, the game sells well, but the disappointing translation creates wariness in Atari's fans.
This game is awful and otherwise lacking any redeeming values.
By the summer of 1982, home and arcade video games have become an unstoppable industry, generating $2 billion in annual sales. Industry leader Atari has put video games in over 5 million households and grabbed a 40% share of the home computer market with the success of the VCS.
I'd like an Atari 2600 system, please, and everything that goes with it. Everything? You sure want everything? I want everything.
Ironically, when I arrived at Atari in 1982, we were saying, we're so big.
Is that everything? It's not everything. You can get nearly 300 different cartridges. 300.
We're just as large as theatrical revenue for movies.
Oh, amazing. It's amazing, but it's not everything. It's not everything.
Now, does that sound familiar?
Is that everything? That's everything. For now. For now.
This is the arcade experience. We're ColecoVision, and we bring the arcade experience home.
Coleco and Intellivision are not far behind with their own respective systems.
For the first time in the video game industry, there were two systems at one time that were out there competing with each other. Intellivision, the world's largest toy company, battling Atari, bought by Warner Communications. Boom, it's going to become a big business thing, big stock thing. Oh, what's it going to be?
There's a growing library of Intellivision programs to involve every member of the family.
And for families, it was no longer a question of, should we get a video game system? Now it was, which video game system should we get? And now the sales for both Atari and Intellivision went way up. And so boom, they're going up.
I'm back to pass.
Go for it, Dad.
Caught it.
The competition just became really intense.
But the bubble is about to burst.
Only from Atari.
In July 1982, Atari agrees to pay $25 million for the rights to produce a video game based on the hit movie E.T.
The way E.T. came down, I got a telephone call, and I'm like, hello, and someone goes, is this Howard? And I go, yes. They go, please hold for Ray Kazar. So I'm holding for Ray Kazar, and Ray comes on, and this is late in July. Ray says, hey, Howard, we need E.T., and we need it by September 1st. So that's like 5.5, 6 weeks. He goes, can you do it? And I said, you know something, Ray? I can definitely do it, provided we reach the right arrangement.
Atari spent how many millions of dollars to get the rights to E.T. and then rushed it into production and came up with this terrible game. So admittedly, probably he did the best thing he could in the time frame they gave him, but they started putting impossible schedules on everybody, so that also damaged the quality of games.
Unfortunately, that's what Atari was doing. They were after the name, thinking, well, we could sell anything. They manufactured more copies of E.T. than there were Atari 2600s in existence. Not a good idea.
Having already been bitten by poorly produced games, Atari owners aren't standing in line for the extraterrestrial.
Let's put it this way. A lot of people didn't like E.T. A lot of people who didn't even play E.T. or know anything about E.T. got into E.T. bashing. It was the thing to bash because E.T. became the icon of the crash. I mean, the crash was something everyone was aware of, and E.T. became a thing because when you tell a story, you can't just tell the whole story. You got to personify it. That's what they say about storytelling. So the gaming industry crashed. That's too big a story. It doesn't make sense. E.T. killed the game industry. That gives you a focus. That gives you a thing to hate. And E.T. became that.
In the winter of 1982, Atari is forced to announce crippling financial losses. Sales of its video game cartridges take a nosedive.
We have E.T., for example, a wonderful love story cartridge,
contributing to a 50% drop in earnings.
Thus, Atari, which once monopolized the charts, this week has only one of the top 5.
but business is still very good.
Mattel, the company behind Intellivision, also announces losses.
I didn't know.
And the arcade is suffering their own demise.
We filled the arcades with them, and we were starting to fill secondary locations like Safeways and 7-Elevens and dentist offices, and by the middle of 1982, we were just full.
It was a fad. I think there's no other way to put it. It was like early rock and roll, really. Enough people started coming, and enough companies started making games. It just kept growing, and people, built bigger and bigger ones until finally, the whole thing just sort of collapsed under its own weight.
Starting in 1982 or so, a single quarter was not enough revenue for a game to earn for a 2-minute period. We ultimately figured out that we needed a buck, and we don't have dollar coins in the States. A buck is a big spend. It's not a casual spend.
A massive influx of new games leaves distributors overwhelmed with products, and even quality games are getting lost in the struggle for shelf and advertising space.
The problem was there was just too much product out there. You have dozens and dozens of software companies releasing garbage.
A lot of what killed Atari was an incredible number of companies getting into the business producing incredibly bad games.
There was too much product for store shelves. They had to start being marked down.
We said, oh, they're all going to go out of business, but we didn't recognize what that meant. And what that meant was when they all went out of business, all that product would flood the retail shelves.
Most of those games wound up being sold at $2 and $3 a piece at discounters.
And here we are coming out with $30 or $40 products.
No matter how good a game was, it was very difficult to sell a game for $30, $40 when you could go in for $30, $40 and get 15 games, even if they were all terrible.
And Johnny's dad goes in at Christmas and he can buy him 8 cartridges or he can buy him 1 cartridge. And he says, well, I don't know the difference. I'll buy him these 8 that are in the front bin and wrap up more gifts for Christmas. And ours that were still frontline good products and didn't sell.
You have these third-party companies, can't sell their stuff, they're going out of business. What do? They dump all their goods at cutthroat prices. Now you can get games for $5.
It was a very difficult paradigm for them to beat.
It was really the demise of the business, and we unfortunately didn't see it coming.
And the lack of foresight on the technology front further cripples the industry.
Even in the 2600, the day we shipped the first one, I told the guys at Warner, I said, this product, is over in 3 years or 4. We've got to start designing, the Stella 2. And they just didn't get it. They thought that, oh, how can that be?
Look at Atari Basketball and Intellivision. Again, I find Intellivision more sophisticated.
And it turns out that not innovating led to the demise of Atari in 1982, 83. And they just didn't see it. They just didn't see it.
In September of 1983, in the middle of the night, 20 tractor trailers leave an Atari warehouse loaded with millions of unsold game cartridges. They are driven to a remote site in Alamogordo, New Mexico, where the games are crushed and buried. In the fall of 1983, only a year after analysts were predicting record profits for the video game industry, the bottom had dropped out.
Did I mention the tar pits?
Atari, the industry leader, posted a $356 million loss for the second quarter alone.
Well, rode the wave a little bit. Really crashed after Christmas of '83, and Activision sales plummeted. I mean, just plummeted by 84, 85, probably went to a fifth of what they were.
If you're going to spend your time playing video games, get a Commodore 64 or...
And we went on to the Commodore 64 because the 2600 was gone and there was no coming back. There actually was, that's another story, but at the time you thought there was no coming back.
If you think ColecoVision plays all Atari cartridges... You mean it can?
In an attempt to jumpstart the failing industry, Atari releases the 5200.
Now you're talking.
Updating the technology behind their aging system. But many believe it's too little, too late.
Super system.
Much of the public can't grasp the need for a new system.
Of course, when the 2600's lifespan ran out and they had to go to the 5200, the American consumer went, wait a minute, I've had the same record player for 25 years. I've had the same television set for 25 years. Why are you suddenly telling me now that after like 4 years, 5 years, I've got to trade in this game system for a whole new game system? It was a very difficult concept to get across. That began the great backslide where the industry died for 2 years.
To make matters worse, home video game systems are now facing competition from personal computers. With the drop in price and increase in power, PCs officially take the lead.
Games fell into decline, just in terms of perception. I'll give you an example. Our publisher actually told us at one point, I used these exact words, he said, please try to avoid using words like games and fun in the articles you write. Because now everything had to be a simulation. It was like people would be more interested in running a simulation of a dairy farm than they were going to be in playing Breakout. But that was the feeling was that we've now moved past video games, we're now into computers, and all computers should do is create educational simulations.
The rise of personal computers affected video games in a number of ways. It allowed users to do more. I mean, the keyboard instrument allowed people to do things they couldn't before in games. Like, you have all these functions on the keyboard.
Many of the companies who a year earlier were so desperate to get into the business of making games were now just as desperate to distance themselves from it. February 1984, Mattel announces it will sell Intellivision off for $20 million. In March 1984, Odyssey closes its doors. And finally, on July 2nd, 1984, Warner Communications agrees to sell Atari. The game companies start to vanish. People begin to think of video games as having only been a fad, which would soon disappear. But thanks to Japanese game company Nintendo, those people are wrong.
By 85, 86, when the Nintendo came out, I must tell you, when I first looked at it, I was not impressed. I did not think that this was going to bring back video gaming. Yet it did, because people wanted that simplicity.
The Nintendo Entertainment System, or NES, gave gamers better graphics, better games, and single-handedly revived the home console market.
The one thing that we always like to try to do is try to create games that people who have never played games before can pick up and try out and immediately enjoy and have fun with.
Nintendo turned the industry around with big franchises, games that people really wanted to play, likable characters like Super Mario.
And from the beginning, Nintendo was careful to avoid the mistakes of their American counterparts. To set themselves apart, game packs replace game cartridges, and robots are added.
Now, the manufacturers, Sony and Microsoft, Nintendo, they have approval over the games. They look at the games and say, is this good enough? Is this of a quality to be on our system?
Nintendo reinvented the world. Nintendo showed that people still wanted entertainment, they still wanted fun, and they still wanted games.
And the games do go on. Today, nearly 145 million people play games. An industry that nearly faded now enjoys even greater popularity and keeps growing. But has the game industry learned from its mistakes?
I'd like to think that the console industry won't crash again, but you never know. I think something that companies have learned from the crash of 1983 was that don't put all of your eggs in one basket. Don't bank on just one game. Make sure you have, a safety net below you with a couple of games that, will help you get by. You can't rely on just one game anymore. It's all about diversifying your lineup and making sure you have a little something for everybody, just in case gamers go, I don't want that anymore. This is what I want. Hopefully you have that too.